If you're having any difficulties accessing anything in this video tutorial, please contact our help desk by email at aoe.gmshelp@vermont.gov or by phone at 802-479-1044. We will help you find alternative means to access this information. If you are looking for more information on accessing the GMS platform, please see the GMS user manual located in the training section of the GMS landing page.
Landing page for folks that are coming back later as well. So we've logged in, and again, we're here in the test system and clicked on the Access Select link, and now I'm part of Rutland City in this test environment, and I'm set up as the business manager for Rutland City. Now, what you'll notice here on the Access Select page is all of the different applications that Rutland City has been working on. One of the predecessors that has to be completed to get most of your grant applications actually submitted is going through the central data collection. I'm going to open that up right now. And when I open up central data, you'll notice one of the tabs in central data is the DUNS number. On that DUNS number page, that's where your business manager or someone at the at your district entered the agency's DUNS number as well as their current SAM expiration date. The point of that is it's something that the federal government requires the Agency of Education to have in order to make sure that they can make payments to your district. And at some point during the FY19 year, this SAM expiration date will expire. It'll become necessary for Rutland City, in this case, to come out and create an amendment before April 4th so that they update this date and we can continue paying them through the duration of the year. I'll go ahead and click on the Return to Access Select link here in the top right. So we can see that the central data collection is in final approved status here. And so that's one of the things that will allow payments to go through. Now, in the test environment, for the purposes of this demonstration, I took their Perkins application and moved it forward to final approved status. And similarly, their CFP is in final approved status just in the test environment. Whereas IDEA is still in submitted status and their SIG 1003G project is in return for changes. These are all their original applications, and the important thing to understand is that it's the original application being approved that dictates whether or not you'll be able to have payments made. If you've moved on to Amendment 1 or Amendment 2 even, and for example, if Amendment 1 has been returned for changes, that still means that the original application would have had to have been final approved status. And with that having been done, that will allow you to click on the payments button and actually get some action out of that and begin the process of working through those reimbursement requests. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the payments button right now for the IDEA grant, and I'm going to get an error message because their original application has not yet reached final approved status. This red message up here at the top says the selected application doesn't have a cycle in the proper status, so clicking the payments button is not valid. Again, that's what's going to happen until the Secretary has signed off on any of the grant applications that have been working their way through the approval process. So I should make a mention that here in the next week we're going to have 21st Century projects online. The 21st Century projects, because they were applied for outside of the system, we're actually going to be uploading approved budgets for those programs, and those approved budgets will not require the same workflow to go through. Basically, they will be approved as if the Secretary had already approved them in the system, so they will immediately be available for payments. So we've seen what happens when you try to click on the grant that isn't in a status available for payments. Let's go on to the CFP, which is in final approved status. When I click on the payments page here, payments button, excuse me, this brings me into what we call the payment summary page. And the purpose of this page is to show there's one column for each program within the consolidated program within the CFP. There are a couple, IDEA as a consolidated program, even Migrant and Best Act 230 are consolidated programs. But at the top of the section, the top of the page, we display some information that talks about what was the allocation, how much was the final approved budget for, and we get into, there are going to be cases where your allocation was actually more than your final approved budget, and that's the case if you've chosen not to invest all of your funds in the case of the CFP here. We also have, school-wide, which doesn't actually have an allocation, but it can be the recipient of consolidated funds from Titles 1, 2, and 4 primarily, as well as program funds within IDEA and other collections as well. So right now, you'll notice school-wide had no allocation, whereas Title I for Rutland City, they had a $1.2 million Title I allocation for FY19. The next line down, adjustments, typically means a carryover or, unexpended funds or unawarded funds from the prior year. Those get loaded into the system. So in this case, those could be positive, they could be negative, depending on what those adjustments are about. But in this case, what we have out there are just carryover, and that's all positives. So that brought Rutland City up to approximately $1.63 million, of which they transferred or consolidated $1.5 million, and I can see that that went into school-wide here. So school-wide picked up almost $1.7 million in transfers, whereas Title I sent $1.5 million, and you can see Title II sent $170,000, Title IV sent $16,000 over here. Ultimately, we worked towards the point where, remember, since we're in test, I've got this actually approved, and the final approved budget in this case for Title I, even though they had $118,000, they budgeted $85,000. Whereas on school-wide, you do have to budget a full amount that you consolidate in there. They consolidated in almost $1.7 million, and that was their approved school-wide budget. Moving down into the further into this page, the pending reimbursement requests section is intended to show claims that you have submitted, and I use the term claims and reimbursement requests interchangeably. If you have a pending reimbursement request, that means it's been approved by the finance team at AOE, but it has not yet gone over to Vision on the next for the next payment cycle. Vision's going to we're going to send a batch file over to Vision every time there's a pay date. The first pay date being, well, there's one tomorrow, but we're not going to have anybody final approved to send any money over there. The next pay date would have normally been August 16th, but because of the holiday, it'll be sent on August 15th, and I would anticipate we'll send some of the first payments through on August 15th in that initial batch there. And so the point is, every 2 weeks, there's a batch being sent over. How frequently you submit claims is really a question for your district. The system doesn't have any requirement about how frequently you can submit claims, but the agency will probably provide some guidance, whether you want to submit claims monthly. I know it's the practice of many districts to submit quarterly. That's from a technical standpoint, that's not something the system is going to mandate. One of the things that will be coming up soon is the folks there at the agency are working on a frequently asked questions document specific to the payments process, and we'll be putting that out as a link on some of the system web pages so that you're able to see that, and hopefully that will reduce some of the questions that need to be sent into the help desk if that should arise. Now, I've got in the previous training session, I submitted claims to the agency. I approved a claim for $2,001 for Title I, and so that's why that's showing up in the pending section there. Nothing has come back from Vision as saying, here's the voucher number that we've paid you with, so there's nothing in the completed section. A pending payment, once we receive reconciliation information from Vision, will move out of pending and into completed. And then ultimately there's just some basic math going on. Said, well, you had $85,000 on your budget, you've claimed $2,001, and that means you have $83,000 left to claim. So again, this page is ultimately just informational. The completed payments link is actually a hyperlink, and since there aren't any completed payments, I can't show this, but if you click on this link, it will bring you to some details that show the disaggregated data that show the individual payments that comprise the completed payments you've received and when you received them. But since there's nothing for you to enter on this page particularly, this button here at the top, View Reimbursement Requests and Closeout Reports, is what everyone's going to click to move into the process of creating a reimbursement request. So I click on View Reimbursement Requests, and since we're in the CFP, the first thing it needs to say is, well, which program do you want to work with? I'll open up this drop-down list. Now, at this time, school-wide is not listed here. That's something that we're still making some final updates to, so it will be there soon. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and select Title I-A, which was what we did in the earlier training session. This brings up what we call the Reimbursement Request menu, of the claims that have already been created for FY19 by this district, again, just for Title I. I switch over to Title II, there will be a different list of claims out there. They've only got 2 claims going in the test environment right now. We'll go back to Title I here. And I can see that, for example, request number 1, I created that during our previous training session. It was set up to say that the date range that the expenditures for that claim were between the 1st and the 20th of July. Not a date that we expect people to really be using. Again, something we were doing just for the purposes of testing. Most likely when you're submitting a claim, it's for an entire calendar month or a calendar quarter. I submitted that claim to the agency on the 26th, and it was actually, I went in and approved it for the purposes of that training session. So that's why that claim is in approved status. What that means is we send it over to Vision, and it will be paid in the next batch. Again, within approximately 2 weeks. And the folks there at the agency, you know, the pay date is when those batches are sent. There's certainly some lead time. If, you know, for example, today being August 1st and tomorrow being a payment date, if you submitted a claim today, there's very little chance that that's going to make the batch to go over on August 2nd, but that's something that the folks at the agency are in control of, how frequent, how long, much lead time it will take them to get those claims pushed through. Something that as everybody gets more comfortable working with, I'm sure that timeline will shorten. Okay, so reimbursement request number 1, I'm going to go ahead and click this radio button to the left of that and click on open request. I can't do anything to request number 1 because you'll notice it says this request has been approved, no more updates will be saved. I'm going to step through this particular claim just to make sure everybody sees a little bit about how a claim is structured. We have an instructions link right now that we're still putting content behind. We may put the frequently asked questions document right here. There's a link here that talks about what is the AOE chart of accounts. I know there's been some training going on the uniform chart of accounts recently. I click on this link and it'll open another browser tab. And over here on the AOE site is this PDF that says the chart of accounts for the grants management system. And AOE's put this information out there that explains what's the difference between Object Code 100, Object Code 300. Some examples. We've got some examples out there for Perkins right now. We may hopefully get other examples out there for the other grant programs as well. But in addition to the Object Code definition, we get into the minor level function code definition. Function codes are part of the budgeting process, but they are not part of the claims process. So when we're doing, even though we budgeted to both a function code and object code level of detail, when we claim, we'll only be claiming at the object code level of detail. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the browser tab with the reimbursement request in it. And what you'll see at the top of every reimbursement request is a grid. This is effectively the budget summary page from the application, from the CFP application. We grab the Title I budget summary. And what I can see is that they've got $32,000 in instructional salaries. They've got, within Object Code 500 other purchase services, they've got $16,000 and $36,000 worth of supplies. Again, and that ultimately summed to the $85,000 worth of money that they budgeted. And again, they had $118,000 allocated. They just chose to only budget $85,000 of that $118,000. So what I did on this claim when we were working on this is I put in a line item for salaries, Object Code 100. Notice there's no drop down for the function code here. Here in this information, in this brief description field, I typed in teacher salaries just to illustrate that information. This has just got to be enough so that the folks in the finance team are able to confirm that the line item that you're claiming here is consistent with something that was within the budget. And so they'll take a look at that, and then I entered this amount. And notice it said that the final approved budget was for $32,000, and at the time claim number 1 was created, that was the full amount remaining. I asked for $2,000 of that money, and that's all within the allowable tolerances that I'll explain in a few moments. So there was $2,001 on this claim, and I had to enter some other information that we'll step through a little bit further on down. Okay, So let me leave this claim here, and I'm going to go create a brand new one now. I'm going to click the link that says return to the reimbursement or expenditure menu. And instead of opening an existing claim, business managers will have access to this button that says create new request. So I hit the create new request button, and what happens is request number 4 was just created through part of that process. If I go right back to the menu, you'll be able to see that request number 4 was created here today during our session on 8/1, and it's in not submitted status. Go ahead and reopen that request. And actually, as long as we're stepping through this, let me illustrate something. I can click on request number 4, and since it is in control of the district right now, it's in not submitted status, I can click on delete request, and it will. It's gone, and now if I can go create a new request, and the system will give me request number 4 again, but that would be blank when I do that. So again, now I'm on a new version of reimbursement request number 4. Budget grid is displayed here at the top of the page. And I'm going to go ahead and say I'd like to claim some additional money in salaries here. So I'm going to, just for the purposes of testing, I'll type in instructional salaries. We're not asking for information about what teacher or information of that level of granularity here. I'll tab out of this cell, and I'm just going to come down here and hit calculate totals for a second. Let this web page do a little bit of math for me. Actually, nothing to calculate since I didn't actually enter an amount. But this time I'll go ahead and enter that I'm asking for $5,000. There are a few fields down here. I'm going to be displaying the grant award number. For right now, that number is still hidden, but that will be comprised of the program code, your agency's district code, your district code, the sequence number, the same data elements that were part of the grant award number previously. Now, the expenditures, this is the date range that talks about when did these expenditures occur. And so I'm going to go ahead and type in 7/1 of 18 through 7/31 of 2018. Now, that seems like a very legitimate range, but the problem is this is claim number 4. Claims 1 through 3 already used part of that month, and there is a validation built into the system to prevent you from overlapping with a previously entered claim. So when I hit the Save Page button, I'm going to get an error message that says that claim, it overlaps with the date ranges on these other reimbursement requests. So in order to correct that, I think that the last claim went through 7/26, so I'm going to go change this date. Change this date to 7/27. See, a question just came in. I'll answer that in just a second. Now when I hit Save Page, those error messages are gone because that is not an overlapping date range. Okay, question just came in. If there is an approved indirect cost rate, will it automatically calculate here? Great question. I will come back to that in just a second, but the bottom line is that the indirect cost rates will display here. Remember, just because you have an indirect cost rate doesn't mean a couple things. Some programs don't allow for indirect costs to be budgeted. Title I does, but your actual rate will display. But then whether or not you chose to use indirect costs will reflect in what we call the derived indirect cost rate. And the amount that you budgeted here on indirect costs will show up, and the amount you've previously claimed for indirect costs will show up. At the request of the agency, you have the option to claim, if you have approved indirect costs on your budget, you have the option to claim them proportional to the direct expenses you've incurred. The system will not auto-calculate the amount of indirect costs to pay you, and that the reason for that is it's leaving you the ability to wait until late in the year to claim all your indirect costs if you choose to do that. If you want to claim them every month, that's perfectly fine. Also, it's just that what we've seen in many cases is districts, keep that out there as a insurance amount. Quite frankly, if they wind up with some other expenses, then they can submit a budget amendment to move money out of indirect costs and into object code 300, for example. And that way, they have the ability to make that late change if they haven't already claimed those indirect costs earlier in the year. Excuse me. So we'll step through I can't go through an example here with Rutland City because we didn't actually load indirect costs in the test system for Rutland City here. If there are many districts that don't have approved indirect cost rates, again, this is something that Cassandra Ryan and some of the folks in compliance there at the agency are working with districts to make sure that they get their rates approved and ultimately entered into the system. Before you get to claiming indirect costs, that indirect cost has to be budgeted into your application, though. Okay, before we got talking about indirect costs, I had just changed the expenditure date range from 7/1 to 7/31 to 7/27 to 7/31. Very unusual date range. We wouldn't expect to see that, but that ultimately is what let the system error messages be resolved correctly. I mentioned earlier the central data collection. The DUNS number and SAM expiration date are brought over from those collections. Now, if it were to be the case that Rutland City, if we were now in April and they couldn't submit this claim because their SAM expiration date was in the past, that is a validation. We won't let you submit that claim if your SAM expiration date was yesterday, for example. In this case, by going through and amending central data and submitting central data with a revised entity overview record from the system once Shelley Matz at the Agency of Education has approved the central data amendments, and now you have a new SAM expiration date. Clicking on this refresh SAM date button will bring over the newly approved SAM expiration date from your central data amendment. So that way you don't have to abandon that claim and re-enter that information. So nothing for you to enter here. This is actually brought over from the central data collection, but you also can't change this field here. In the recap section, we get into how, okay, you had $118,000 allocated, but we're only really going to allow you to claim $85,000. There are some questions here about programmatic income, more relevant for programs that actually have income, but it's actually asked on each claim. Initially, we ask, have you received any program income during this reporting period? And if the answer is no, then there's nothing further to respond to. But if you do say, yes, I did receive some program income, a second question opens that says, did you spend that money? And if you say no, then you get the question that says, well, why not? In and of itself, this is not going to result in the returning of any submitted claim, but it's information that the agency needs to have, and will be, a point of information during future monitoring visits if there's programmatic. We'll look at these program income questions to make sure it's consistent with records that you have there at your district. If I said yes, I did spend that money, then again there's nothing else that needs to be responded to there. This section of the page is related to uploading supporting documentation. This is most typically what we're looking for here is a report out of your local accounting system that shows the expenditures that you, for this program, for this month, or for this reporting period that you're now claiming. And so by clicking the Browse button, it'll open up the dialog box here on my computer, and I'll pick on, I have a sample file that I use. PDFs work great. If you do work with Google Docs, please make sure you save it as a document before attempting to upload it. I'll go ahead and say open, and now I'll save page. And as soon as I save it, you'll see a link to this file redisplay at the bottom of the page. And there it is, upload test. And this is what will allow the folks at AOE Finance to click on these links and verify the line items within your expenditures. That was, this would just as easily be your actual local accounting document, but you can upload as many documents as you need. No one document can be larger than 6 meg in size, though. Okay. And in the event that you upload a document that you didn't mean to upload, what you can do is check this checkbox and hit Save Page, and that will delete that document from the web server, and that will no longer be part of that process. So that checkbox is what that does is described right here. And then, consistent with uniform grant guidance, we're required to include this statement that says, I promise that I certify I am this person, and all these are complete and accurate. And I'm not trying to restate what's here legally. The point is, it's an assurance that you're agreeing to in the process of certifying and submitting your claim. Now, there's a couple other validations within this process. Remember, once I hit save, this one line item for $5,000 that I had entered, we retrieved from the database and see, okay, well, you had $32,000 approved in salaries, and you had already claimed $2,000. Remember, that $2,001 claim actually had $2,000 worth of salaries on it. So now I'm saying, all right, I'd like to claim $5,000 in salaries. For 1 week in July, that's not okay, but for the purposes of testing, it proves an example. Let's say I want to claim $35,000 in salaries. Now, what the agency's asked me to do, and it's not present in all in the test environment, is to use what we call a tolerance level of 35%. So the total approved amount of salaries was $32,000. So what's actually possible here is I can type in 32,000 times 1.35, the 35% tolerance. The system will let me claim up to $43,200 in salaries, not $43,201, but exactly $43,200. That way, if you wind up with more in salaries than you had initially anticipated, you don't have to submit a budget amendment if you can stay within that 35% tolerance. It does not allow you to ever exceed the total approved budget amount. So if you did go up to $43,000 on salaries, you'd have to be $10,000 under on some other object code in order to, stay under this $85,000 limit. Now, right now in test, I believe I have the tolerance for Title I set as 0. So it's going to tell me, well, wait a minute, you've already claimed $2,000. Now you're asking for 35 more. That's $37,000. What your final approved budget for salaries is $32,000. So I'm going to hit Save Page. Bear with me 1 second. My display just froze there. Hang on just 1 second. My point is that, sorry, I'm not sure exactly what I'm fighting with on my computer right now. I think the GoToMeeting has got me wrestling with something here. When I hit the Save Page button, an error message will display at the top of the page that says, you've claimed, you're asking on this claim plus all previous claims, you've asked for $37,000 in salaries, whereas you're only allowed to have $32,000. Or when I get the tolerance message in there, that'll say $43,200. And so $35,000 in salaries would have been allowed when that 35% tolerance is actually in place. Again, you're just not allowed to exceed the total approved budget amount. Okay, I'm going to close out this browser tab since it seems to have frozen on me, and I'll come back at it if I can here. Leave. Okay. Apologies. Again, for those of you that are just joining us, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type those into the chat facility, and I'll be sure to respond to those as quickly as I can. Coming back into Rutland City, I'm going to go into the CFP payments, view reimbursement requests, and here's the claim that we had been working on. I'm going to open that request. And remember, we had $5,000 saved, but when I was trying to change to $35,000, I had to close that browser tab. So I'm going to hit $35,000 now. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and hit Save Page here. And here's that error message. You're asking for, $37,003. Remember, $2,000 was on an approved claim. There's actually $3 on those submitted claims that are not yet approved. And the limit is actually $32,000. That will save $43,000 in production because of the 35% tolerance rule. But the point is, this is how it's making sure we don't overclaim any particular object code. So if I drop this down to $25,000 just for argument's sake, even though that's an absurd amount of money for that short a period of time, the system's not testing for absurd. That's what the folks at the agency are looking for and so that error message went away after I resaved, because now I've actually gotten under the limit of how much is out there for the year. I can add as many lines as I would like, and in fact, I can have multiple salary lines. I can type in salary line number 2, and I'll just put that out there for $5, and hit Save Page. The system will go ahead and aggregate those amounts when they come into the agency, so they know that you're claiming a total of $25,005 to object code 100. Ultimately, I'll upload supporting documentation and click on Certify Submit. I want to go back and show a section that an LEA user will see, though, and it's something that becomes visible after a claim is paid. So I go back to the Reimbursement Request menu here, and claim number 1, what you'll see is down at the bottom a section that says the payment funding details. Now, this information is something that we'll fill out, but the point is it will show you, okay, during the 2019 grant year, what year were the funds appropriated? I mean, are we paying you prior year money or current year money? This isn't necessarily something that you need to be too concerned about, but when you get into making school-wide payments, and school-wide is comprised of money from multiple programs, this is something that will allow you to do reconciliation within your local books. And it's something that the folks within compliance as well as the fiscal team will be talking about further, especially in the frequently asked questions document there. So again, you'll have access to this payment funding details section down here in the bottom. Okay, got a point came in from the agency. Definitely a good idea to save and save often here so that you can make sure you don't accidentally, inadvertently lose any of the entries that you've typed. I saved after each line. You can enter, 10 lines if you want, and then hit save. When you come into a brand new claim, let me go ahead and go back to the claim that we were working on a few minutes ago here, claim number 4. By default, the system will give you 10 blank lines. If you use all 10, it will give you 10 more. But the reason that we do that is to minimize the risk that you type in 25 lines and then forgot to hit save for more than an hour, and we wind up losing, the system times you out and you've lost the entries that you've made. If I, for example, decided I really didn't want to have this second line out here, I click on Delete Row and then hit Save Page at the bottom, and that checkbox will cause that delete to occur. And now I'm back down to just the $25,000 here. So that's another part of the process. The key validations to understand is the 35% tolerance rule at an object code level. And if you cross that 35% tolerance, if I get to the point where I needed to claim $44,000 in salaries, the way to deal with that is to go back to the application side and to create an amendment and revise the budget to increase the budget up to a level that is consistent with what you're actually expending. Because, $32,000 was what you had initially planned, but now that's changed. The date range, cannot overlap with other date ranges. It can't be in the future. If I type in that this is through 8/31 and hit Save Page, I'll get an error message saying you can't go past today. Can't go because you can't claim future expenses. Now, I haven't resolved this data not saved error. So when I actually leave this page by going back to the menu and go back into the claim again, you'll notice that since I didn't resolve a data not saved error, it reverts back to the most recent successful save, which in this case was 7/31. If your SAM expiration date is in the past, the key point there is to make sure that you go create an amendment to central data, discuss any program income that you may have, attach documentation out of your local accounting system, and hit Certify and Submit. Now, ultimately, once a claim has been submitted, it'll come into AOE Fiscal. Let's talk a little bit about what happens in that case. When I click on the I can see this is still in submitted status, but one thing might happen is that the folks there at the at AOE Fiscal may return your application, return your claim for changes. If they were to do that, click on this radio button here. You'll receive an email message that says your reimbursement request has been returned for changes. Then click on the review summary button. And what I can do is I can pick on this radio button that says, okay, this is where comments would have been entered by on a checklist by the actual agency. And in fairness to John and anybody else in the fiscal, any comments in the test environment were things that I wrote and not actually things that were written by the agency folks, because I don't remember what I really wrote here. Second browser tab opens with, is this reimbursement request acceptable? That's what John, Mark, Julie, the other folks at the agency are filling out when a reimbursement request comes in, and they may say yes, they might have said no. Now, this is related to reimbursement request number 1, and I'm logged in as a district ID, so I can't save anything here, but I can actually see the comments. And John would have checked this checkbox and said, you know, for example, you've got something coded in object code 500 and it should have been in object code 300, just for argument's sake. And that might be grounds for him returning that claim for changes. Again, this review checklist opens in a pop-up in a pop-up window, and so you need to make sure your pop-up blockers are disabled for the GMS site. But with the comments in that claim, you'll be able to come back to your reimbursement request and make revisions. For example, if he said, okay, it shouldn't have been in object code 600, it should have been in object code something else, you can actually change that line, or object codes can't be changed once they've been successfully saved, so it requires actually deleting the row and re-adding another row, but you can cut and paste to make that happen if you like. Cut and paste the description so that you don't have to re-enter that whole description there. Okay, we're coming up close to the end of an hour, and I've also gotten through most of the topics that I wanted to cover. Bear with me just one second while I take a quick look at the topics here. Okay. The items, it's going to happen at some point during the year for most of you that you run into an error message that you're not familiar with. Either it's a system error message where there's a problem occurring, or you're getting a validation that you don't quite understand. When that happens, if you would please email to the help desk, the aoe.gmshelp@vermont.gov. What we really need from you are your district's full name, who you are, what user you were logged in as. We don't ever want to send your password. We don't need that, and we won't ever ask you for that. The point is, send in your username, your web page you were on, your district name. Tell us what was it that you clicked. I was on reimbursement request number 2. I clicked save page, and I got an error message that said X. And usually it's the text that's in red, like this, that is most helpful to get us to be able to resolve the issue sooner. If you send that into the help desk, that'll be routed to the appropriate folks, and we'll be able to respond back to you as quickly as possible. All right, I'm going to, that's really the end of the material that I had to cover here. We've got 20 folks on the line right now, and every time I open up the lines, there's typically a fair amount of background going on there, so I don't want to do that right now. But I do want to offer, is anybody else have any questions on the chat line? I'll be glad to respond to those. Let's see. Okay, question just came in about, sorry, where is that? Where is the previous year cash carryover recorded? And will the agency be sending invoices for FY18? I'm going to let Frank, if you could ask the folks there in the room with you to talk about the sending of invoices. I'll talk about the previous year cash carryover here. And actually, where the carryover gets loaded, let me illustrate this by going back into the Rutland City application. Excuse me. If I open the actual application and go into the allocations page, what you'll see is that Rutland City had $1.2 million in current year Title I money, and then in prior year, their unexpended or unawarded summed to $374,000. Now, I believe that's actually the unawarded funds, and as we're closing out FY18 projects AOE Fiscal is going to be sending me updated numbers that says, okay, the amount that they didn't expend was an additional $50,000, for example. But my point is that of the $1.6 million in Title I money that Rutland City currently has available, 1.2 was current and 300,000 was prior year money. When claims get submitted, we're going to pay you from prior year money until that prior year money is exhausted. So hypothetically speaking, if a claim came in for $400,000 for Title I, we would spend $374,000 in FY18 appropriations, and the remaining $26,000 would be in FY19 appropriations. Now, where you will be able to see that is, that FIFO methodology happens automatically. You don't have to ask for FY18 versus FY19 money. But when I click on reimbursement request number 1, remember down in the bottom section of the page, you'll see this payment funding details section. And this is what if we had that $400,000 claim, what you would see is that in grant year 2019, from appropriation year 2018, I was paid $374,000. And then from grant year 19, appropriation year 19, I got the remaining $26,000. So you'll see multiple lines that comprise the total payment amount here. Okay. Comment came back in from the agency regarding the invoices, and AOE says, we do not anticipate billing for the cash. Payments will be adjusted accordingly. Okay. So I'll let that answer stew for a quick second here. Later on, we'll be coming into a different training session at the end of FY19 that talks about how to complete the closeout of a project after you've completed all of your FY19 reimbursements, so that we can push carryover forward into what will then be FY20. Let's see. I think that's pretty much all the content that I had to cover today. Remember, you can't click on payments until you get an application in final approved status. Perkins is in final approved, and when I click on Perkins, you only see the one column because it's not a consolidated application. But just like they had for CFP, I can click on View Reimbursement Requests. And initially, when you come in, I didn't have to click which program because it's not consolidated. I can create a new Perkins request, and it looks exactly the same as a Title I budget does, just the numbers are different, the activities are different. Okay, any last questions? All right, I think that that pretty well takes care of everything that we had on our agenda today. Again, the folks at the agency expect to be publishing a frequently asked questions document soon, and we'll make that link visible. I'm sorry, the frequently asked questions will be displayed on the GMS logon page, which, as most of you know, is right here. You expect to see some information out here about that. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time this morning. Appreciate your attention. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll have this recording available in the not too distant future for people to look at on the video tutorial section of the GMS logon page. Thank you again.